Why wasn't Mr. Brooks allowed to argue for jury nullification? Bitch, no one gets to argue for jury nullification because, and let me explain this really quickly. I believe in jury nullification 100%. It is the inherent ability of a jury to reject a prosecution. That one jury member, any one juror, can reject a prosecution and mistrial it. All 12 jurors agreeing, that's not a mistrial. That's 12 not guilties. That nullifies the prosecution. And every jury has the power to do this. The reason jury nullification exists is conceptual, though. It's conceptual because no one gets to question the jury verdict when it's not guilty. The state does not get an appeal. There's no one who can come out and say, well, these jurors were biased. They don't get to go after. They don't get to go after a jury verdict. So the jury has a practical ability to nullify any prosecution. Now, the reason that's critically important is because if a community, which a jury is a representation of a community, it's a microcosm of a macrocosm. If a community has decided that a law or its application are unjust, or even the application in this particular instance are unjust, if the weight of the communal feeling when given the facts to review is enough to convince all 12 jurors to not guilty verdict, even if the facts state that the person technically commit the crime, they can just say no. And that's important because unjust law can be counteracted by the will of the people. And what we get to over and over in our country, in the founding of it, in how the system works out, is that the will of the people actually does exist. And when it manifests, it's terrifying. Why do you think they're so scared of January 6th? Because on January 6th, the will of not very many people brought the most powerful group of fucking tyrants on the planet to their knees. Immediately, unapologetically. And the crackdown on the aftermath of that is a flex of power to counteract the little bug in the social conscious of the United States that, oh yeah, they belong to us. These processes belong to us. This power belongs to us. That's what scares them. That's why we're constantly pit against each other on fucking bullshit like abortion, on trans rights, on all this frivolous shit. When you get down to the real critical questions of our country in, do we have power or not? The real critical questions. Do we have power or not? By the way, that's not us asking that. That's Congress. That's the president. That's the judiciary. So jury nullification is this element where we go, you know what? Weed laws are fucking gay. These are stupid things. And I'm tired of prosecuting people for just having weed. I'm not talking about someone who has a bunch of weed in their hand, stabs the guy that didn't want to pay for it. I'm talking about you've got weed, you're walking around, cop pulls you over, prosecutes you. Community can say, you know what? We're tired of this shit. We're tired of cops doing this. No, done. We're not gonna let this happen. Or alternatively, someone's kid gets raped. That someone puts on a pair of brass knuckles, goes over to the rapist's house, and punches his dick off, and then feeds it to him, and then stomps on his skull until he's dead. And they go in there, and the facts show, yeah, he did this. Wasn't really self-defense or whatever. But they go, you know what? Yeah, we're fine with that. We're okay with that. Because, you know, I do it too. Jury nullification. Perfect. That's why it exists. When the collective will of the community is such that a prosecution is unjust, you get to have jury nullification. But here's why you can't argue it. Jury nullification is not a legal power of the jury. It is not based in law. There is no legal treatise that recognizes jury nullification as a valid exercise of law. In fact, jurors are commanded under law to determine facts and apply them to the law. That's it. That is their role. That is their authority. And it's critical that that remains their authority and their legal mandate, because when we get down to it, where does all state power derive from? State power derives from the people who give it to the state. All right? So let's wind all this up into a simple explanation. Without the state, with no government, in an anarchist environment, law is enforced. Well, there is no law, I guess. Rules, social mores, whatever, is enforced by the people, typically by the individual, but maybe by the community. If you get a couple homies to go with you, that's fine. That's the way to do it. When you submit that power to government, you go, we need you to protect us from monsters in our midst, but we are going to restrain the state from acting as vigilantes, because vigilantes don't always care about the facts. They get enough facts and they go after it. And they, but they don't have investigative power. They don't have all of the resources that the state can muster. So we go, we're going to give you this authority to investigate, to issue warrants, to arrest, to bring trial, and then ultimately to punish. All of those powers come from the people, because they could do all those things in an anarchy, but they give it to the state to do so. The exchange is that we say, but you have to follow these processes and these rules. And as you follow these processes and these rules, in the interest of fairness, we want you to apply this set of rules as strictly as possible. So jury nullification is not exercising the state authority to determine fact that's given to the jury. Determine fact and apply it to the law. That's how the jury does it. And jury nullification doesn't exist because it's not applying fact to law. If you apply fact to law, you come to the other conclusion. So we don't allow people to argue for jury nullification because that's not the state's mandate and it's not the jury's mandate. And I know some people don't like that. And I'm a little uncomfortable with not being able to do it, but that's the legal reasoning behind it. Because jury nullification is technically an unlawful act. Or I shouldn't say unlawful. It's an extra lawful act. It's outside of the law, which may be just. It may be correct, but it isn't within the rules. So no one gets to argue for jury nullification. That's why no one gets to argue for jury nullification. And in that context, it makes plenty of sense. Even if we would really want to tell a jury, like, you don't have to convict this guy at all. You don't have to do that. We don't want people doing that. No one's allowed to do it. It has nothing to do with him being black. It has everything to do with it just not being the way you get to do this. And by the way, one of the reasons, if we're going to get into it, that you're not allowed to argue jury nullification is because of whites in Mississippi in the past nullifying prosecutions of whites who did stuff to black people. I mean, because jury nullification has worked that way before. And similarly, we don't just want jury nullification from hood communities nullifying the prosecution of local drug lords because they either like them, they pay them off, whatever sort of thing. They terrorize the community, whatever it is. This is why we don't have these why we don't argue for jury nullifications, because the interesting thing about jury nullification is it gets typically applied to protect a particular tribe. Tribalism makes jury nullification a very, very biased thing. So for this dumb bitch to be arguing for jury nullification in the context of a racially charged case is to not know and not understand the dangers that jury nullification has posed at various times of American jurisprudence. And we're not really there. And it's not like a risk in this case, except the idea of maybe like a collective white guilt or something over Darrell Brooks. Oh, God. If we would have just paid him reparations, he wouldn't have had grounds to run over all those women and children. I guess that could happen. It didn't happen here, but it was actually a possibility, of course. I saw some people suggesting there might be like one white guilt holdout or whatever. But the reality is tribalism has been used with jury nullification several times in the past. And it's produced some outcomes that aren't reflective of justice. That's also not the purpose of jury nullification. Really, the purpose is this is an unjust prosecution in and of itself. Okay, there's my little tirade on jury nullification.